An independent audit and report of compliance with accounting standards, state and federal laws, and grant program requirements was recently completed, and the results presented to the Jackson County Board of Commissioners, administration, and the public. Let's look at the findings.
So our responsibilities as your auditors is to issue an opinion on your financial statements. So when we're just looking at the accounting and are these financial statements, were we able to get comfortable that they're, that there's reasonable assurance that they're materially correct? We were able to get there. We issued an unmodified or clean opinion on these financial statements. So that is quite the accomplishment on something that's this large.
And so the first series of slides here are looking at that full accrual. These are probably the most difficult to understand and to get some meaning out of. So a couple benchmarks here that might help you get a sense of how you're doing overall. This is just a slide that looks at your major revenue streams and trends over the last several years, and you'll see a pretty nice trend there, some increasing revenues. But also in here of interest is where you're getting those increase in revenues. Obviously, there's a lot of sensitivity over property taxes. That's the one revenue stream where you've had probably the least amount of increase. Where you've really seen growth is in the grants. So you've had a very nice increase there. Also charges for services, a very positive trend there, and really without increasing property taxes. On the expense side, first of all, the total expenses, you were holding the line, actually dropped overall expenses in 2015. Pretty big increase in 2016. The main driver of that is actually an expense you had to book for which you didn't cut a check for. It's related to your involvement with Oregon PERS. That was about $32 million hit on your expenses.
I do want to point out that while our financial statements reflect the booking of the PERS liability, it's not a new liability. It's a liability we've had all along. It's just the first year we're required to report it. So we have a biennium of increases of about 4% or $3.6 million a biennium coming 3 times. So we're going to have many millions of dollars in additional expenses in PERS, which we are prepared to implement, covering the cost of by having reserved an operating reserve in our operating budget without the need to necessarily make reductions.
So actually you've done some smart things that you can within your level of control, which is to perhaps hang on to some cash so that when those increase in contributions come, you have those resources to make those additional payments. But what's interesting here is that your general government has held the line. Where you see increase in spending is community services and safety, also health and human services. This slide, this is really a good benchmark to look at. This is your net position. So basically that first blue bar, if you were to sell off all of the county's assets at book value and liquidate all of the debts at book value, this is what would be left over. And what you want to see is at least that trend holding steady. That orange bar or red bar, that represents the portion of your resources that are capital assets in nature. Those are the roads, bridges, the buildings, the equipment, less the debt that you use to acquire those. And you'll see a positive trend there. That trend line for a lot of our government clients is actually declining because of budgetary constraints, right? It's easy to put off spending for roads and bridges and replacement of the assets that you own when you have budgetary constraints. So overall, this is showing stability. It's showing some growth in your capital assets and obviously doing a good job of maintaining what you have here. So that's kind of the full accrual basis. If we look at now more that modified or, there's a lot of emphasis on the general fund because that's more within your level of control. These are the services that you provide that aren't dictated necessarily by others. And you've actually brought in more revenue than you've incurred in expenditures pretty much every year in there. Another benchmark to look at is just cash. How are we doing with our cash and investments, and what does that balance look like? And your cash position is kind of held steady, a little bit of an improvement the last couple of years, up to $150 million. And then this is just the general fund. What is the cash and investments held in your general fund? And again, you've seen a nice positive trend line. It's not an extravagant position, but it's certainly a healthy position. Now, one thing that's real fascinating to me is your property tax rate. So what's amazing to me is that you've been able to do or maintain your financial position here with one of the lowest property tax rates. When you look at the counties in the northern part of the state that aren't so dependent or really didn't have timber revenues, their rates are over $3. Some county, I think Multnomah is over $4 per thousand, almost double your rate. So you've done really well with a pretty low property tax rate here in the county. You're doing amazingly well in stewardship of the resources that you have available to you. And so hats off to for your leadership and the leadership of your management team here.